Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us in this session where we would like to share with you the 2018-2021 INTA Strategic Plan and Implementation Plan that was approved by our Board of Directors the day before yesterday. So, of course, when we talk about strategy and implementation, strategy makes little sense if it's not properly implemented. And what is critical as well is that we try to move rapidly from, strategy design into delivery. What does that mean in terms of INTA? Well, as you know, we are currently closing our strategic plan 2014-2017. We are entering into the next 4 years, 2018-2021. But more importantly, we're already thinking in terms of what's going to happen 2022-2025. It might sound a little ambitious, but that's the way, the board works. That's the way the association works. Today, what we're going to be sharing with you is what has been the outcome of the 2014-2017 strategic plan, and we're going to be talking about the next one. We would like to share with you what has been our methodology, what will be the implementation of the strategic plan, what are going to be the main programs and projects, and finally, we would like to somehow land that in terms of the work of the committees and how critical the committees and you are in implementing the strategic plan. So, as a starting point, I'm going to ask you, David, whether you can share with us what has been, the outcome of the strategic plan.
Thank you, Etienne. I've just been given the hardest task since I joined INTA, which is summarizing in 5 to 10 minutes 4 years of work from all volunteers, all staff members, and from our CEO and president. So before we take a deep dive into our new strategic plan, I would like to share with you what and how over the past 4 years we have positioned ourselves for success for the next 4 years to come. So please also forgive me if I addressed a few points that were addressed by our President Joe on Tuesday. As a reminder, the promise we made 4 years ago was to protect trademarks, enhance our communications, further our international expansion, and increase member satisfaction. In our service to our strategic plan, over the past 4 years, we have delivered the following key elements: our geographical and substantive expansion, our global influence, our growing international membership, increased member satisfaction, and we've maintained a very solid financial position. So I'm going to go a bit in details of each element I've just gone through. On geographical expansion, in 2013, we had 3 representative offices in Brussels, Shanghai, and Washington, and we had a representative in Geneva and New Delhi. Since then, we've opened 2 additional representative offices, one in Santiago de Chile and one in Singapore. This is really to maintain our more regular contacts with governments and key constituents in those regions. Those regional offices also facilitate more meaningful engagement between us, the members, and the staff. And also, they really contributed to grow our membership significantly, but I will come to that in a minute. On the substantive expansion point, we've expanded our committee structure from 29 to 37. We've now a committee focusing on many strategic IP rights beyond trademarks. So I'm going to give you a few examples. So within the advocacy group, the copyright committee drafted an approved board resolution covering copyright protection for trademark material, and another one that passed on Tuesday on copyright registration as a precondition to an infringement suit. The design committee has also been very active and drafted 2 board resolutions which were approved. One covering the Hague Agreement concerning the international registration of industrial designs. And the committee also established a model design law guideline, which also was part of the discussion on the board on Tuesday. The Geographic Indications Committee has advocated significantly before the WTO Secretariat and WTO member states as well. In the communication group, the Impact Studies Committee has published 4 studies during this committee term. One on trademarks in Latin America, which is a study of their economic impact in 5 countries in the region, which was Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Panama, and Peru. That was published in December 2016. We had the economic impacts of counterfeiting and piracy. That was February 2017. The new GTLD cost impact surveys in May 2017. And the economic contribution of trademark-intensive industries in Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. So, of course, I've forgotten a lot of committee work, and I apologize for that, but I had only a few minutes. In terms of broader influence, we've also broadened our influence globally through our advocacy and policy work. Over the past 4 years, we've sent 70 delegations to 40 countries around the world. Took me 35 years to go to 40 countries, so that's an achievement. We formalized relationships with various IP offices and organizations globally through 15 memoranda of understanding, cooperation agreements, and letter of intent. We submitted 91 comments and testimony to government agencies in 22 jurisdictions, as well as to WIPO and ICANN. As a result of our increased engagement, we are given more and more credibility, and we are able to influence legislation and public policy worldwide. Now, in terms of growing membership, we, over the past 4 years, have been, grown in key regions. Membership in the European Union has grown by 9%. Outside the EU, but in Europe, we've grown by 8%. In North Africa and the Middle East, 9%. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, nearly 7%. At the same time, corporate membership increased 8%, and the ratio of corporates outside North America expanded by 30%. On the satisfaction of members, one way that INTA has worked to increase member satisfaction is through the expansion of legal resources. So I'm going to share with you a few examples. We have the International Guide to GIs, Certification Marks, and Collective Marks, which was launched in December 2015, covering 20 jurisdictions. We launched in November 2016 the Enforcement Litigation Guide, covering 40 jurisdictions. And then there is the famous country guides, which has expanded to an extraordinary now 113 jurisdictions. The educational program has also expanded, both geographically and substantively. The annual meeting, as you know, is now on a 3-year rotation, going outside the US every 3rd year. And following the successful leadership meeting in Panama, we are also looking into taking the meeting outside the US again in the future. We're hosting also general conferences in more cities around the world and covering various and varied topics. For example, we had the 2015 Geographical Name Conference in Rome that was attended by 170 registrants across 44 countries. 196 registrants from 36 countries attended the well-known Building Africa 2016 conference, and that was in Cape Town. 228 traveled from 32 countries to Hong Kong for the Anti-Counterfeiting Committee conference earlier in the year. And we had a few industry-based or sectoral-based conference in March in New York, first on fashion, in sports, and then before that, 3D printing. Looking ahead, the Brand Authenticity Conference taking place in Berlin later this month explores the intersection of brands and corporate social responsibility. INTA is also finding new and innovative ways to provide members with meaningful ways to engage in our association and industry. For example, the Pro Bono Trademark Clearinghouse is a great example of that. We launched a pilot program in July, and so far we've had 55 applications. One final point, financial position. At the same time, we are very careful of watching the bottom line. We are maintaining a very good financial health. We've exceeded our forecast budget over the past 4 years. Our reserve fund is more than 23 million and cover 98% of our projecting expenses for 2018. And our balance sheet shows 20.8 million in assets, which predominantly is investment portfolio and cash accounts. And we have minimal liabilities, consisting primarily in deferred revenues and accrued expenses. In short, the association is a very financial solid position. Now, as you can see, the 2014-2017 strategic plan has had an impressive implementation that has helped us a lot to prepare for the future. We, the members volunteers, are really well positioned to contribute for the association's work over the next 4 years. So now I want to hand over to our fabulous Tish to share with you some of the background on the development of the new strategic plan.
Thanks, David. So now we've heard how successful we were in our 2014-2017 strategic plan. Let's talk a little bit about the methodology we utilized in order to create the new 2018-2021 strategic plan. That process actually began in January of 2016 at the beginning of the Planning Committee's new term. We determined that the strategic plan must do a bunch of things. First, it needs to build upon the successes that we've enjoyed under the 2014-2017 plan. We also needed to set INTA's future priorities. We want to guide the association's activities, provide a clear framework for all of our committees, and finally, be inclusive and forward-thinking. So, to achieve these goals for the new strategic plan, the Planning Committee started by soliciting feedback from all stakeholders in IP. And through an inclusive and comprehensive consultation process, we obtained feedback from a diverse group of constituencies and stakeholders, each with its own unique perspective related to the role brands play in our society. So from within the IP community, we spoke with INTA past presidents, the board of directors and officers, members, staff, other IP offices, and other IP organizations. We also wanted to reach beyond just the IP community because, as you know, brands don't just live with trademarks and intellectual property, but can touch upon other areas as well. So we wanted to consult with key stakeholders that have a vested interest in intellectual property in order to obtain their unique perspectives on the future role of our association. So we met with non-IP organizations such as global financial advisors, with business school professors, CEOs, media professionals, marketing and consumer experts, and legislators. As a result of all of that information and gathering, we took that, when we decided who we wanted to talk to, we needed to decide how we were going to talk to them. And so we held inspirational conversations, brainstorming sessions, focus groups, and we received written responses to questionnaires from all of the stakeholders, both IP and non-IP. We collected a wealth of information from the participants and their views on the impact of economic and social and societal changes on companies and consumers, the interrelationship between trademarks and brands, the interrelationship between brands and consumers, and the role associations can play to represent brand owner and consumer interests. So now we have all of that information. The task came to the Planning Committee to actually put that all together and create, first, a new mission statement. Here's the new mission statement up on the screen for you to see. And as you can tell, it's important for INTA to be dedicated to supporting trademarks and related intellectual property, and it's our mission to further support and foster consumer trust, economic growth, and innovation. The second major outcome of gathering all of that information was to come up with 3 strategic directions, which are now contained in the 2018-2021 strategic plan. And those 3 are to promote the value of trademarks and brands, to reinforce consumer trust, and to embrace innovation and change. By promoting the value of trademarks and brands, we will protect trademarks and related IP, we will harmonize laws and convergence of practices, We will focus on enforcement, and we will promote the business value of brands. By reinforcing consumer trust, we will reinforce trademarks as sources of information and brands as promises of delivery. We will communicate the contribution of brands to economies and society, and we will also promote brand equity. And in order to embrace innovation and change, we will evaluate changes as a result of technology, innovation, and evolving consumer needs and values. We will educate members on impact of innovation, technology, and change on brands. And we will provide innovative, valuable services to our members. So once you have a strategic plan, what next? This slide shows you that from the strategic plan, we need to move into an implementation plan, which Etienne is going to explain in a moment. But from there, it needs to filter down even further. And by that, there's two sides. One side is the INTA staff, and as you can see, there are going to be department objectives, and from there are going to be staff objectives. And all of these objectives are of course, meant to support and implement the strategic plan. On the opposite, not the opposite side, but the other side, you have the task force and the committee objectives that will then turn into subcommittee and project team objectives. So with that, I'm going to ask Etienne to go into the implementation plan for you.
Thank you very much, Tish. So, as we said at the beginning, strategy without implementation doesn't really make sense. And what is critical to us is that we really develop, strong processes and procedures within INTA. So, what methodology did we use to develop the new implementation plan? We started doing that internally, and the first thing we did was really looking at identifying new projects, priorities per department within INTA. Then we looked again at the same issue, trying to identify which would be the top 20, 25 organization-wide priorities. And then we looked at 3 specific questions. What are we doing today that we need to improve? What are we doing today that we need to stop? And what are we not doing today that perhaps we should be considering? After that, we requested staff to provide input. And for almost 2 months, we had, on the boards of our boardroom at INTA, we had staff putting Post-its and making suggestions and making recommendations and requesting that some things should be reviewed. We looked into that together with the senior management. We defined which should be the priorities. And after that, we collected the input from president and the officers. So as a result of that, we have now a new implementation plan that is really a common understanding and a common interpretation on where we're going. And this is what Tish was sharing with you, what we call the kind of cascading effect. We're going to have an efficient execution throughout INTA, and that's going to be mostly thanks to your leadership in the different committees and subcommittees. And finally, we will be able to make a good assessment on how performing we've been, how efficient we've been at the end of these 4 years. So, strategic plan has 3 strategic directions. Implementation plan has 6 programs. And as a result of that, we're going to have 34 different projects. So let me perhaps deep dive into those and explain to you what this is going to be about. In terms of the 6 implementation programs, there is no surprise. The first 3 are the same as you can see in the strategic plan, so promoting the value of trademarks and brands, reinforcing consumer trust, and embracing innovation and change. But in addition to that, we need to really reinforce the added value to our members, because we are a membership organization. We need to perhaps focus a little more on staff, and particularly on talent. And finally, and that's really critical, we need to enhance our systems and processes. Let's talk a little about promoting the value of trademarks and brands. You have 7 projects there: further harmonization, enforcement, anti-counterfeiting, internet policy, brand value, brand equity, INTA's global presence, and what we call beyond trademarks. I'm not going to be able to go through each and every detail, and in fact, we're going to be forwarding you later on the full implementation plan, but let me perhaps give you a few ideas of what we're going to be doing. In terms of further harmonization, of course, we're going to continue promoting our model, trademark, and design law guidelines. We're going to continue promoting harmonization and accession to international treaties, and we're going to reinforce our interaction with IPOs around the world, but also with policymakers. We had 2 members of Congress on Tuesday. Yesterday at the PAC reception, which was extremely well attended, we had a member of Congress and a member of Senate. And this is something that we want to continue developing. And we've been able to do that through the Congressional Trademark Caucus. Well, this is perhaps a concept that we need to develop, and we need to bring that to other regions of the world, because we need to make sure that our policymakers understand the value of IP. In terms of enforcement, we need to interact more with the judiciary. And just to give you an example, we have a great resource, which is the Trademark Reporter. Perhaps we need to make that accessible to judges around the world. They're going to learn a little more about, our practice, about our views, and perhaps they're going to pay a little more attention at the decisions they're taking, and sometimes we know that's extremely important. In terms of anti-counterfeiting, we're going to reinforce all the efforts that we've been doing over the past 2 years and before that. And as a result of that, for example, the Anti-Counterfeiting Committee now has a kind of different structure with 1 chair and 2 vice chairs, like the Internet Committee, because there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And just to give you an example there, we're going to continue organizing the workshop of IP offices in Latin America about enforcement and anti-counterfeiting, and we're going to expand that to Asia Pacific with the support of the IP office of Philippines. In terms of anti-counterfeiting as well, we need to make sure that there is more engagement between brick-and-mortar brand owners and online platforms and online providers. If there's need to be a conversation, that needs to happen here at INTA. When we talk about internet, we want to make sure that we're a credible partner of ICANN, but beyond ICANN, with IGF and with other decision makers of what internet is today. And as important as that, we need to understand better what is happening in Asia with internet governance. So we might look into that more closely. Brand value, brand equity, the importance of brands, we're all familiar with that, but we really need to look into perhaps the economic value of brands on one side, and there is already a project team that is looking into that and developing an action plan for INTA. But we also need to make sure that we fight the concept of brand restriction, plain packaging, and beyond. So that's something we need to develop. In terms of our global presence, we're going to reinforce our existing offices. We want to perhaps interact even more with some of the Geneva-based organizations, and we're going to have a due diligence to look at Africa and to identify whether we should be opening a rep office there, and if that's the case, where should be the location of that office. And finally, in terms of beyond trademarks, we need to look more into data privacy, data protection. We need to reinforce what we're doing in the field of copyrights, in the field of designs, and we might even go beyond that, because we know that nowadays corporations do not do anymore just trademarks. They don't talk about trademarks, they talk about brands. When we talk about reinforcing consumer trust, you see here that we have 6 major projects. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I just would like to highlight a couple of them. We're going to be looking much more into consumers on the one side and into SMEs and entrepreneurs on the other side. We need to empower them. We need to provide them with perhaps toolkits, with materials, so that they understand the value of IP. And when they start their businesses, they think about IP as one of the first things they need to develop. And in terms of Unreal, we've been extremely successful over the past years, but it's probably time that we go a step further and we have a strong digital strategy for Unreal. Now, talking about embracing innovation and change, one of the first things you will notice is that we're going to completely reposition INTA on the web. And that means we're going to develop a completely different website. And hopefully the website is going to be, of course, mostly for our community. But perhaps our website should also be open to policymakers, to media, and to consumers. And that means that, our language, our messages might be a little different and certainly need to be easier to understand. As important as that, we really need to look at how innovation and change is going to be impacting trademarks and brands, how that is going to be impacting IP professionals and the IP profession at large, and how that will be impacting INTA as well. Just to give you a couple of examples, some IP offices are already using or are considering artificial intelligence to make the examination of trademark applications. If that is really developed as a technology, that means that perhaps the laws are not going to change, but certainly the regulations will be changing. And that means as well that your work as professionals might change as well. The same applies to blockchain, so we need to look into that. And what INTA would like to do is really make that analysis, be able to understand what's going to happen, and be able to share that with all our members. And then, of course, it will be up to you to take the decisions you need to take. But the same applies to virtual reality or augmented reality. And that might have an impact on INTA as an organization in terms of membership, in terms of its meetings. We're not saying that we're changing things, but we definitely want to look into those issues and understand how we can take advantage of technology and innovation. And as a final project here, you see that we want to move toward becoming a data-driven organization. And that means that we need to take advantage of the technology to have high-quality data that really allows us to take smart decisions, that really helps us understand what your needs are so that we really provide you the service you deserve. In terms of reinforcing added value to members, you see here that we talk about reinforcing membership engagement, and that really means looking at what is the return on investment of being a member. What is the return on investment of going to an annual meeting? We should perhaps, understand better what is happening there. But that also means that we're going to be looking at potential incentives to, attend some of our meetings, some of our conferences. And beyond that, we're going to be looking perhaps at a loyalty program for our members, like air companies. We should probably look into that. We definitely need to better communicate with members, and that means that we're going to review, we're going to modernize both the INTA Bulletin and the Global Report. Again, we need to take advantage of technology and, have a closer interaction with the members. And something we're going to be talking later on, and Randi is going to be talking about that, we definitely need to enhance, committee management through tools and through also more efficiency at the level of the committees so that the experience is really worth it. As a final thing, in terms of reviewing our programming, we need to perhaps reformat, repackage some of our programs. We need, again, to take advantage of technology. And we probably, and you've already noticed that, we need to go more into areas of perhaps data protection or technology matters or purely, business management issues that really help you perform your daily work. In terms of staff and talent, the first one is precisely this one. It's, training our staff, recruiting staff when we do not have the talent that we need internally to serve our members. It's also information sharing, which means that on top of having a new website, we're going to be developing a new intranet. We want to review the INTA corporate culture. And for those of you who are familiar with our headquarters in New York, our lease is coming to an end. That's going to happen in 2020. But already 3 years ago, we started the process to look at what do we need as office space. We want to optimize our space, and we want to make sure that, our space and the image of our space is also aligned with this strategic plan, because consistency is always critical. And last but not least, in order to be able to retain good staff and good talent, we need to take care of their benefits. Enhancing systems and processes. Again, within this final program, there are 7 projects. We really want to look at our core systems. We need to identify, potential gaps in what we have today. And we're going to be looking at, document management. That is critical. It's, by the way, one of the very few projects that we're not able to achieve from the 2014-2017 implementation plan. And that's the reason it's back here. We need to start looking at potential new revenue generators. And we need to start using more what we call activity-based costing, which is really understanding all the costs that are behind every activity, every initiative we do. We're certainly in a very solid, healthy financial position, but as a not-for-profit, our duty is to make our best to be able to invest in as many projects as possible. And the outcome of that should be to be able to have, at the end of these 4 years, an INTA balanced scorecard that really helps us, drive the organization and bring it to the future. So I'm going to very quickly share with you what's going to be the timeline of this, I would say, ambitious and bold implementation plan. Not everything will be covered in the timeline we're going to be showing to you, but that gives you at least an idea in terms of where we're going. So you're going to see some key milestones, and what we're going to be sharing with you are completion dates, except for the cultural transformation that, as you can imagine, requires, more time to happen. In 2018, you should see a new INTA website. We're going to have a consumer-related study. We're going to have a strategy to make Unreal digital. We're going to develop a brand value strategy. We're going to relaunch the INTA Foundation because we see an opportunity there to really support academics and students, and that should be the role of the foundation. We're going to somehow review and formalize the idea of the industry groups so that on top of the committees, industries are going to be able to meet together in a formally informal way. We, of course, need to be careful about antitrust matters, but we think it's an added value to the members. We're going to start the cultural transformation, and finally, we're going to be developing a new intranet. 2019 will be the year of our Digital Asia strategy. We will be looking into opening a rep office in Africa. We will have an impact study on innovation and change. We will hopefully have as well an impact study on SMEs. We're going to formalize cooperation with organizations that are not necessarily IP related. And I'm thinking, for example, about data privacy organizations, or I'm thinking about technology organizations that can really add value to what we do. And more importantly, we're going to be enhancing our committee experience and our committee structure so that we get prepared for the 2020-2021 term. We will look as well at the bulletin and the global report, and we will be looking at document management and staff benefits. 2020 should be the year where we're going to be looking at our emerging markets. Perhaps we need to have a closer eye into those and have a strategy on how to approach them. We're going to have a proposal on going beyond trademarks. We're going to be implementing our data project, and we're going to start, digitalizing our content. And in addition to that, we will be looking at our space, and a project I didn't mention before, but I think, is key to an organization such as ours, and it's looking into corporate social responsibility. And I'm getting to the end of this long presentation, at least on my part. By 2021, we do hope to have a strong INTA balanced scorecard. We will be looking, hopefully, at implementing the Beyond Trademarks strategy, and by then, we will already have our 2022-2025 strategic plan approved. So that's what's going to happen over the next 4 years. It's ambitious, it's bold, but we did it in 2014, 2017, thanks to all of you, so there is no reason why we should not be able to do it. And perhaps what we need to do now is look into what does that mean from a committee perspective, and there is no one better place than Randi to explain that. So, Randi, all yours.
Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Okay, that's better. Thank you. We just have a few more slides, and my section is really all about you. So the things that I'm saying hopefully will just reinforce things that you already know, and also hopefully be a refresher. So we wanted to take a look at, bring you back to this slide, because we want to discuss with you, now that you have a greater understanding excuse me, of the strategic plan and the implementation plan, how this relates back to your committee objectives and to your Global Advisory Council, or GAC, objectives. And we want to stress that although you see the 6 programs, the 34 projects, and it's very ambitious, as Etienne said, it's not all that we're doing. So these plans encompass 4 years, and that's 2 committee terms where you'll be working on some of these projects, but also on your normal committee objectives. So even if you don't see your committee name mentioned in those implementation plan, or if you don't see a project that directly relates to your committee, as long as what you're doing and your objectives relate back to the strategic plan, those 3 overarching objectives, which are in fact 3 of the 6 programs of the implementation plan, then what you're doing is going to be vital to the success of the association. So we wanted to just take you back to the committee structure. So INTA has 36 committees that are divided into 3 groups. The advocacy group, of course, works on policy and legislative issues to advance trademark and related IP law. The resources group and the committees there, they produce the vast amount of content that, whether it's educational program, it's our online resources, that's available to you as members, but also available to the public. And finally, the communications group, they're the committees that help us to communicate what the association is doing, all of our achievements to the IP community, but also to the non-IP community. So we also wanted to mention, because it's sometimes not always clear, that each of these groups has councils. So if you're a chair or vice chair of any of the advocacy group committees, you're also on the advocacy group council. Same for the resources and the communications group. And we put this chart here because we really want to foster communications not only between the committees in your group, but across committees, across groups, I'm sorry. So if let's just say you're on the communications group, you're on one of those committees, and you're dealing with an issue that deals with designs or indigenous rights, we want you to remember, look back at this and say, wait, we have committees on those areas, and I can tap into that expertise to help in the work that I'm doing. So in addition to the committee structure, we also have the Global Advisory Councils, or the GAC. So these are 8 regional or country-specific councils, and they also contribute to the strategic plan by looking at 3 specific areas. So advocacy, we look to them to advise us and to advise the committees on key issues in the area that we should be mindful of, that we should keep track of. On the membership side, we look to them to help us not only to keep our corporate members engaged, but to grow our corporate membership. And finally, on the communication side, we want them to tell us and how we could better communicate the issues in their regions or their countries. So hopefully during this leadership meeting, you're taking advantage of the leadership labs that are taking place throughout the week. And these actually started at last leadership meeting. We got a lot of great feedback from these labs. And one of the things that we heard is that some of our resources might be online, some of them might be handouts, but they wanted the resources in one place. So what we did, as you can tell from this slide, we like our toolkits. We have a lot of different toolkits to hopefully make our committees, as Etienne said, more efficient and more effective. So let's start with the committee management toolkit. So the committee member toolkit is a smaller subset of this committee management toolkit. So I wanted to focus first on this one. You can see on the slides all of the information that's included there, but the committee leaders will have all the expectations documents for all the roles in their committees, so it's clear what everyone's roles and responsibilities are. We've also included things in there like the leadership transition roadmap, which we're also talking about at these leadership labs, and that's how you can effectively share what you've learned in this committee term and hand it off to the leaders of the next committee term so they could use those and your collective wisdom from what you've learned from the last committee term and how you can transfer that forward. So a part of this management toolkit is the objectives toolkit, which hopefully all of your staff liaisons should have already shared with you. But here we give you tips on how to draft SMART objectives. And one of the things that we ask you to do is to keep your committees efficient and not get overwhelmed, is to limit your objectives, your overarching objectives, to about 5 or less. And then from there, cascade your subcommittee objectives, again, about 5 or less. And also in there, we want you to be, when you're thinking about your objectives, are there committees that you need to work with? Should you have a shared committee goal? We want you to be mindful of INTA's resources, so you might say, oh, I have a great idea for a database, but we have to just make sure that's something that we could actually have in our pipeline and get done. So hopefully you're working with that now to get your 2018-2019 objectives. I also just wanted to mention that the GACs have specific objectives as well, that they're contributing. They have SMART objectives that are helping us to achieve the strategic plan and the implementation plan. Here also in the management toolkit, we have the committee performance toolkit. And this it starts off with tools to hopefully encourage participation of your committee members. But it's also realistic, and that is, you know, you all probably are familiar. They have some people who don't do as much or actually are non-performers on your committees. So we wanted to give you concrete tools to address these challenges. So there you'll actually have sample scripts, you'll have emails about how to address this with those committee members who aren't meeting the expectations of what it means to be a committee member. And this includes removing people from committees. And we, of course, want to be mindful that we're a volunteer association, but we also want to respect the work of the people who are very active on the committees. And we're very fortunate to have many more people who are interested and want to be on committees than we have committee slots. So that's why Tish was very involved in this task force. It was actually a presidential task force, so you see how the importance of this issue. It went to the board, so from the board on down, we're committed to help you deal with these performance challenges. So we want you to take advantage of that toolkit. All of these toolkits are meant to be working documents. So what we'd like to hear from you as you're working with them, what are things that you would like to see included in the future? What would be helpful for you to manage your committees? One of the things that we're excited about and we're working on is sort of guidelines and standards for every kind of committee-generated project. So if you want to do a webinar, what does that mean? What are the guidelines for that? If you want to do a report, how should you tackle that? So that's something to look forward to in the future and that we can add to these toolkits. So with that, we just want to turn it over to you to see what questions you have or comments.
Is that mine?
It's an innovative microphone. So thank you very much for these very, very interesting, I don't know how to hold it, interesting explanations. Now you have mentioned copyright and design several times during your explanations, and could you maybe explore this a little bit more, what these IP rights beyond trademarks mean for INTA in the future, and maybe how this can go a little bit beyond the strategic plan? Thank you.
Okay, well, my answer to that one. I think that's a great question, Axel. So let's look, for example, at data protection, data privacy. I mean, for whatever reason, you know, that's becoming huge, and that's being related to IP, to our advantage. So we definitely need to look into that issue, and we cannot just look into that issue from a purely just trademark perspective. And we have a committee that is a data protection committee, and that's the right place to start thinking if we want to do more in terms of education, in terms of advocacy, in terms of interaction with other organizations, that committee should provide input to INTA. The same applies to copyright. I mean, we've had, you know, resolutions that have been passed this term on copyright-related matters. That's great. Do we want to do more of that? And we need to look into that. The Designs Committee has been extremely active as well. and has provided a model design guideline law, and there's been a resolution that has been passed. But we might want to do even more. And there are other IP rights that we might want to consider as well, because the fact is that, you know, companies do not anymore split trademarks, designs, copyrights, and even perhaps patents. So we need to start thinking about that, and this is about the Beyond Trademarks project.
Thank you. Just further on the global advisory councils, could you please explain how those are made up and what their purpose is for the committees?
I can take that. And Randi, please add. Yeah. So the GAC, it's a good question first because it's very timely wise question. The GAC were increased to 8, if I remember well, in 2014. So it's a symbol of internationalization of the association. There are 2 co-chairs as part of the GACs. They're nominated by the nominating committee, and then they are approved by the board. And then we have in each GAC a member of the board who are, of course, interested in the country or the region. We have committee chairs, vice chairs, also subcommittee chairs, and then we have also regular members or associate members who are active in the region. So there is a very good panel of skilled individuals who are really aware of what's going on in their region, and they are linked, thanks to the composition of GAC, to committees in any event. What we are progressing on, I think, is the fact that the GACs now will have effective objectives. It hasn't been necessarily the case in the past, and some of them may have, you know, tried to find a path. So here we're going to be a bit more rigorous. And also for the GACs, what has been very useful is that they've made very good recommendations to our regional offices. So for example, there's been a very good interaction, and some regional offices still have, like in Europe, we still have to improve, thanks to the recommendation of GAC, we have to improve on engaging members. So that's how, more or less, so I hope that answers your question.
JC. The new strategic plan mentions engagement with consumer organizations, which is kind of cool. Can you expand a little on how INTA is broadening its audience and engaging directly with the general public?
So I'm going to perhaps, you know, answer this one as well. So I think, you know, again, particularly when we approach, you know, policymakers and when we propose, you know, legislative changes, you know, we tend to speak very much on behalf of brand owners, and perhaps we do not take advantage as much as we could from, you know, the consumer perspective. I'm going to give you a very concrete example. I mean, we're talking about, you know, brand restrictions. We've had, you know, the 2017 Presidential Task Force has been looking into that. Well, that's a critical issue for consumers, because if they're not able to identify the origin of the goods and the services, you know, they're going to be in problem. That might even affect, you know, their health and safety. So we need to look into that. Now, how can we do that? Well, perhaps, you know, within our new website, we need to have a language that is easier for them to understand. What are the value of brands, what they bring to them? That's one. Perhaps when we do lobbying, advocacy efforts in our position papers, in our resolutions, we need to be a little more consumer focused. In order to do that, we might want, as you've seen here, we might want to survey young consumers and think about, you know, what is their behavior and how they feel about brands, because that's the next generation, and we need to understand that. And finally, you know, as a result of that, we should enhance our credibility with consumer organizations so that, you know, they talk to us, they partner with us, and perhaps they're going to even be advocating on our behalf. So that's basically, you know, the idea. I hope that answers your question.
Etienne and team, thank you for a great presentation. My question goes to whether or not in the Beyond Trademarks there will be some emphasis on looking at how advertising and marketing laws impact brands, and whether there's been any exploration of exploring relationships with associations like the ANA, the Association of National Advertisers, or the Brand Activation Association, because those go to the point you were just making, Etienne, about how brands are perceived by consumers, and that's of great interest to those kinds of organizations, and it might be worthwhile exploring more formally.
That's a great comment, Catherine. In fact, the American Marketing Association is listed here as, one of our targets in terms of, building bridges with them. We did try a couple of years ago, and some of our members here were, involved in that exercise. I see Dave Fleming in the back, and I know that Dave, Heather, together with some of us, met with the leadership of the American Marketing Association. We did not really follow up on that, and that's, blame on us, but we absolutely need to do that because, again, we cannot just look at registration and enforcement. We need to go beyond that, so absolutely yes.
I just wanted to ask, there's a great deal in the strategic plan, which I find very impressive and encouraging, about broadening our focus and reaching out into different substantive areas and different industry groups and sectors. But I also wonder to what extent there's been thinking about not losing our identity, because to me, one of the strengths of INTA has always been that while we look at lots of different issues, we remain uniquely focused on brand owners and trademarks, as opposed to many other IP organizations that tend to have a much broader focus and therefore have a different identity and a different voice. And so in reaching out and expanding and going into these other areas, I wonder to what extent there has been recognition of the need to retain our unique reputation and focus on trademarks and brands as we do that.
You want me to take that?
Why not?
Why not? And it's a great point, and I'm sure many of you probably were wondering that in your own minds, so it's always great to ask questions. What we're trying to do is to continue to support trademark owners and brand owners, and that is the main platform, that is the basis, that is our identity. But in doing so, we do need to think about the issues that are facing all of you as brands evolve, as these new technologies evolve. And so in order to do so, we're trying to be forward thinking so that we can be on the cutting edge and have those answers for you when those issues arise. But we are always mindful, and that will always be the base of INTA, to serve trademark owners and brand owners. And so when we go out and do those additional, building bridges, et cetera, it's all in the interest of how we're supporting IP, trademarks, and brands. It's not just, we're not interested in marketing to the extent it doesn't relate to that or that it doesn't come back to that. It always has to have that initial impact on trademarks and brands.
If I may, Tish, to kind of add to what you just said, we're not going to change ourselves into an advertising organization or a marketing organization, so there is no risk that we go that path. We're not going to be changing ourselves into a technology organization. But what we want to do is partner with those organizations to really add value to what we do as an association and to what you do as professionals. This is what we have in mind. And I can assure you, any move we might be doing will be a calculated move where we're going to be, defining the strategy, look at the potential impact, measuring that, and making sure that there are no mistakes. So no worries about that.
Hi. I attended a leadership lab yesterday, which was really excellent. There seemed to be one question on everyone's lips, and that is, how can the committees publicize their activities and achievements and share those with the INTA community as a whole? Thank you.
So I'll take that one. So As you know, we have the committee spotlights in the bulletin, but that just gives you an overview of what the committees are doing. So we do need to find better ways to highlight the achievements of the committee. So on one hand, you can imagine that when we get the 36 committees and we get the 5 objectives of those and then the hundreds of subcommittees, we have this huge Excel chart which shows you the work that everyone's doing, but it doesn't really make sense for have you to slog through that to see what the committees are doing. So we're coming up hopefully with new and better ways to do that. So we started with the committee landing pages. So that's a place where the committees can highlight the work that they do. There's a public part of that, and there's also a private part of that where the committees could share documents. And what we're doing, we hope to do this year with our annual report, we've just asked the staff liaisons to work with you to highlight the 5 achievements of the past committee term that we'll put on these committee landing pages, and then also use in the annual report some of those highlights, some of those achievements to communicate everything that these committees are doing. And another thing that we were talking about with the planning committee is perhaps maybe a year or at the end of a committee term having a bulletin article, bulletin issue devoted exclusively to the work of the committees. So those some of the ways that we're thinking about tackling that. And then one of the things that came up, I attended a leadership lab yesterday. It was very helpful to get this kind of feedback. We have reports from the groups, from the advocacy, the resources, and the communications group that go to the board every month or to the executive committee. So what we can do is repurpose those and make those available to everyone. So that really details what they're working on at that period of time. So we're looking at ways of sharing those reports with all of you to get that information on a more timely basis.
There was one question there. Those micros are Randi wants.
Hi, I had the pleasure in the last 2 years to serve on the U.S. Legislation Committee, and I remember that we had in our first call the question of what keeps you up at night. And the question that our corporate members, our regular members, consistently reiterated was that in the United States, we don't have enough in the way of damages to support the litigation efforts of these corporate members. And it occurred to me as I was looking at the strategic plan that we don't do much in the way of research that we would then use to lobby governments to say, you know, this is the cost of trying to enforce our trademarks. And your provisions in your law need to provide enough in the way of resources, in the way of damages, so that we can in fact enforce our rights. So my question is, what in the strategic plan will provide for basic research that we then can use to lobby our legislators around the planet?
That's a great question, and we perhaps did not emphasize enough, you know, the role of the Impact Studies Committee. But, you know, you could see that, you know, there are going to be several studies that are going to happen over the next years. And those of you who were at the opening the other day heard Representative Ted Deutsch speaking about the impact study that was performed by ICC BASCAP together with INTA, which means that, to your point, you know, providing data to support what we're doing is reaching the legislator. Just for you to know, the Impact Studies Committee gets allocated a fair amount of money to perform studies every year. And this is why we've already had 4. And I can tell you that the leadership of the Impact Studies Committee is already looking into what are going to be the priorities for the next years. And if any of your committees has input and feels there is a need for research to be performed by INTA, you should definitely pass that information to the Impact Studies Committee, because the way they work, every year they look into the priorities, they look into their budget, and they decide which are the best options. And in fact, I have to say, and I have to thank, you know, the leadership of Impact Studies this term, because they've put together a very solid procedure to precisely collect the impact and the input from the other committees. So I really encourage all of you, on behalf of the Impact Studies Committee, to provide them your ideas so that we can look into that. Well, if there are no more questions, we would really like to thank you for attending this session, for your questions, and more importantly, we really want to thank you for your support, for your great work, and you know that the greatest strength of this organization are its members. And you know, it's really extremely rewarding, and I feel extremely, you know, proud when I go to an official and I say we're an organization of 32,000 individuals in almost 190 countries. You cannot imagine how powerful that is. So once again, thank you very much, and continue enjoying the leadership meeting here in DC. Thank you.